Hello, everyone. So now we're going to talk about how to effectively revenue manage a short-term rental. So, question I'm going to pose to everyone: how do the different distribution channels affect short-term rentals? So, Carol, why don't you talk about that? I mean, you're the distribution expert.
Yeah, so man, it complicates everything, right? So from a distribution standpoint, and we've talked a little bit throughout the series about the individual unit versus the category type and how that makes distribution a lot more complex. And how do you, from a tech standpoint, how do you actually get the individual unit distributed out and the category distributed out, keep the inventory in sync, be able to forecast variable inventory. It's just there are so many different pieces to it. But when it comes to distribution, you've got to figure out how to get the individual unit to VRBO and Airbnb, but you've got to figure out how to get the category to Expedia and Booking.com. And that might sound easy to someone who doesn't necessarily understand the complexity of distribution, but it is by far not easy, right, Jenna?
100. That's why I'm laughing a little, because it is not easy. It's not easy to have category distribution as well as individual distribution. And then on top of that, what is the pricing strategy for categories versus the individual units? And how does that pricing strategy become seamless rather than very labor intensive to update all the time?
Well, then with distribution, I think too, Jenna, like if there are different owners of different units, they may not all look the same. And so how do you make your marketing decisions and your content distribution around that? I think it just makes it really complicated to maintain that trust in the consumer's eyes with the right content related to even the category itself.
Absolutely. Complicated, James. It's complicated.
It is. It is complicated. So let's talk about moving from a manual environment into automation. So Tess, what are your views on that, on how technology can improve performance for the short-term rental inventory?
I love what Jenna was saying too about trying to maintain some sort of revenue strategy, because you have to have a strategy behind it, because you have to be able to actually get out there in a way that is automated. Continuing to manually shift things around because one owner wants one thing one way, but then what are you doing in a category, and does it belong in that category if the unit is really that different than the rest of them? It requires, I think, a lot of intentional setup and then defining what your strategy is and finding technology that can automate that. Knowing that there's some of that complexity though around having those individual units, I think you also need technology that's flexible enough to allow you to break things down, whether you're going to look at things at an individual unit level or at a total category level.
And does the consumer, like we talked about units versus categories, does the consumer want that unit number? Is that important? Do we get to that level yet?
Well, Heather, you should take that one, I think, right? Maybe
there is definitely a different expectation from a guest who's making a purchase on Airbnb or VRBO. And you might be able to even bundle properties right on Expedia or Booking.com that you don't use the Airbnb, rep level API, because there you find you do get more guest complaints. So you actually approach it with a different kind of lens, the channels. But maybe related to automation, what Tess was saying, you have to take kind of the intentional setup of what am I trying to do? And if you do have short-term rental revenue management technology that gives you these levers, you can build in that owner-specific stuff, right? Like an owner has a requirement of a minimum rate or a minimum length of stay, and that you only want to build on one unit. So can you do that? Does your tech allow you to do it? And then over time, ideally you help that owner see that their requirement is limiting their revenue, but sometimes they have it as a vanity property and they don't care. And you're not aligned with trying to drive revenue. That's, sometimes just the case. And so how do you think about those properties differently, based on available nights per property, right? Per year. I'm not sure you want to take it in that direction, but I'll get it back to you, James.
How do you do that, Jenna, at Outrigger? I mean, you guys have hotels, resorts, VR. I mean,
Yeah.
It's complicated, I know, on your side. And how are you addressing it at Outrigger?
Yeah, it's one of the things that we did in the launch of our new website was we bifurcated the product. So if you want to search for the hotels, you can go down the hotel route. If you want to search for condos, you can go down the hotel route. We've also put in some additional functionality, shopping by maps and shopping by, we're going to go to filtering later on. So it's an evolution of our process to help we're all having the guest in mind of how the guest shops and how the guest thinks to make it easy. And we're hoping by honoring the guest needs, we're going to be honoring our owners' needs by allowing their units to come to the surface based on guest amenities that they're looking for. So we've done it that way. And then, you know, a lot of the work that we've done is being able to hybridize hotel distribution with condo VR or short-term rental distribution. So our condos and our units are getting the benefit of both worlds. And we're hoping we can prove that out in the next quarter or two, that this concept works. It makes sense theoretically, and we're starting to see the fruits of that labor, where a unit can be distributed individually as well as on the category level. But we are working through how do we do the automation and how do we streamline. So it's an evolution and work in progress, and I'm glad we have great partners to help us through it.
That's great. Jenna, you're talking a little bit more about, the distribution side of it. I heard in there. We also talk about revenue. You have a revenue management system. Let's talk about KPIs.
Yep.
So we also I call them the usual suspects within the RMS world of the KPI, RevPAR, revenue, ADR, occupancy. Does it differ within the short-term rental? Is there a different set of KPIs that we're looking at?
I'd be interested to see what Heather says. We have a very hotel KPI mindset around our condo units, and they're all the basic ones. That way we have an even playing field with our hotel product. But I'd be really interested in hearing about additional KPIs on the short-term rental scene, if any of you have any ideas.
Yeah, I can jump in a little bit. So Caryl, I know, has talked about this. The variable inventory is something that really adds a layer of complexity to that's different than hotels, right? Because you have 10 units and you might have a 30-night month, right? So you have 300 nights for a hotel. It's just not that simple. In the month of June, you might have 220. In the month of July, you might have 280. So you can't expect to have the same revenue, right? You're forecasting inventory. And I think, Jenny, you had mentioned that. But ultimately, that's a term that's kind of been evolving called adjusted OCC. So you're not just calculating OCC on your total nights, because your total nights is not what you really have available to make money on. So this adjusted OCC is OCC based on the nights fluctuating, but then that leads to adjusted RevPAR, right? So, and then it kind of puts everything on an even playing field. But if you just look at was my unit on or off, that doesn't really count either. It's really available nights in a month and being able to know when there was a block or a hold or something and remove it. But in addition to that, because units do come in and out so much, if you lose a 1-bed and gain a 4-bed, that's different too. It's also kind of different from hotels. And we think about you're adding suites or something in a renovation, but this is so fluid. So I think another emerging metric that we're going to get better at in the short-term rental space is revenue per available bedroom, so that you are actually looking at what is coming in and out. It's not just a night. Is it how many bedrooms were in that night? So those are just some things that are really different that I think are still in their infancy in the industry too.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
We love available bedroom. It tries to still get you to that great equalizer, right? RevPAR was supposed to be the whole let's try to even it out. How much money am I going to take home? How many rooms do I have? How many nights do I have? But in the fluctuating capacity piece, that's not a fair benchmark necessarily. So I love the per available bedroom.
I always joke and say, I think this industry is managing a hotel that is under renovation in perpetuity. It's crazy. And nobody likes managing a hotel under renovation, right? So buckle up.
Yeah. Now we look at paid room nights, and there's total and then there's paid. So we look at the paid. mostly.
You're kind of looking at adjusted then, like
Yeah,
you're trying to take out the
Yeah.
blocks or owner reservations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, are there systems out there that measure all that yet, or is it a manual measurement for the most part?
So there's a I'll just call out like the 4 kind of data providers: Transparent, AirDNA, Price Labs, Market Dashboards, and then Key Data Dashboards. And I think there are others, but those 4 are really focused on like improving this type of data in the space. Key Data has probably come the farthest with getting like true PMS data. They're kind of like a Calibri in the hotel world, where they've built these APIs to all the PMSs. So they're really trying to obfuscate comp sets, but it's real data. So there's pros and cons to it, but it is how they really try to get to like adjusted metrics, because they can track real data, which one's guest paid night, which one's like a owner block or maintenance block.
Yeah, the wonderful part about a revenue management system is that we get the data in, and then we can support that forecasted data as an output, which then you can kind of see all of that different types of information and metrics that are going to be readily then available. Well, thank you, everyone. This has been a great time speaking with you all, and we look forward to the continued conversations.